Hello, everybody. Welcome to the History Valley podcast. Today I'm joined by John Wayne Loftus in a discussion on one of his many books that he has published. It is titled God and Horrendous Suffering. In the Amazon description of the book, it reads, "The chapters in this book combine to show that it is exceedingly improbable to the point of refutation for the God of Orthodox Theism to exist. The main problem is an evidential one regarding horrendous suffering. A perfectly good God would be opposed to it. An all-powerful God would be capable of eliminating it, and an all-knowing God would know what to do about it. The existence of horrendous suffering in the world leads us to think that God is either not powerful enough to eliminate it, or does not care enough to eliminate it, or is just not smart enough to know what to do about it." From what I read in the book section titled "In Defense of Hitchin's Razor," there is a paragraph in there that states, "From the outset, I'm forced to admit we cannot, technically speaking, completely rule out the possibility of a God who performs hidden, unevidenced miracles. God may do them despite the fact that no reasonable person should believe that she or he did. This technically won't grant believers any hope to pry open the floodgates to their specific miracle assertions, though for free good reasons." So my question regarding that is, would it make sense to you to still say that one can presume there is no deity? Because even with that statement being given, it's because it still cannot be proven to exist. So therefore, it's still logical to presume there is no God until the positive is proven.
Well, I don't see any contradiction. I don't see any problem with both statements. It's You should presume God doesn't exist. The God who is supposed to be all loving and all powerful and all knowledgeable, because there's no evidence for his actions in the world, his or her actions in the world, especially given horrendous suffering. But technically speaking, it's still possible for a God to exist, some kind of deity, some kind of a spiritual force. I've never found any evidence for it, so there's always possibility that a completely hidden God exists. I mean, it's in a way, it's just stating
Hmm.
the obvious. In a way, it's for Christian believers reading the book, they might find some solace in that fact. But that's the facts, and to grant them that solace is just a matter of intellectual integrity to admit that that's the case.
Hmm.
But it doesn't grant much at all, because all I'm saying is that technically it's possible, but that's not saying anything at all, really, because what we want to know is what's probable, not what's possible. If all you ever did is went around and talked about what's possible, you don't have much to say, because all we're concerned about is what's probable. And the book goes on to say, as you probably have looked at it, that is extremely to the improbable to the point of refutation. So it doesn't grant them anything.
Hmm. What, let's let's presume for a moment that this unproven God that we just talked about turned out to exist. Would you think it's safe to say that this particular deity is not the same as any of the deities spoken of in mythology that we know of, and they
Yes,
probably never had contact ever with anyone on Earth?
yeah, but people who believe in God also attach a whole religion to that belief.
Right.
They have doctrines, and they have ways to wear your hair and what hats to wear, and God is always concerned about sex, because God apparently turns out to be male in most religions. So I don't know. Males wrote the text usually, and so it certainly has an ancient barbaric um, masculine perspective to them usually. So um, it just doesn't help.
What do you think of people claiming to have a near-death experience as having seen hell, but they somehow came back after seeing that, despite the fact that in Christian theology, once you're in hell, there is no coming out of it.
Well, now there's a couple of books out there from people who claim to have seen hell and come back, and wrote books about it, who later had to recant because they did it for the money. So it's really quite strange that those books are still touted, but they are. But yeah, I don't necessarily try to step into Christian theology and argue with them on their terms. I like to point out the divergency between religionists and say, I mean, since you're dealing with unevidenced beliefs in the first place, you can't come into a room together with other religionists, and come out with a coherent theology that everyone agrees upon. But if you did, and you were able to come to a consensus on religion and its doctrines and its behaviors, then I'm waiting to debunk that. Because there's no evidence for any of them. So to come to enter that dispute and say, I know the truth about whether or not someone can come back from hell, even though the Bible says it's eternal, and find some loophole like some of them would do. I'm still looking for the evidence of hell, the evidence of a miracle working God, to bother myself with that mundane kind of thing.
What do you make of the history of the development of the horrendous suffering theology in early Christianity? Would you say that over time, the threat against people, non-believers, for what will happen to them after they die, has been modified to sound a lot more extreme over time?
I think they've softened the term down. Am I misunderstanding the question? They have watered hell down.
Okay.
So it doesn't have the same bite anymore. You have depictions of hell in the Bible that are contradictory in some ways. In some ways, you're laid in a heap of smoldering other bodies, and in other depictions, you burn forever in a conscious suffering torment. And so theologians had to look at some of those texts, and they have debates even to this day about is it annihilation, for instance, or is it some kind of just I'm in a place that's a bad place forever, or even only for a temporary period of time, like purgatory. So, but I think that in time, at least in the modern era that we have been witnessing, I mean, from the fundamentalists of the early 1900s to now, you have people like Ryan Bell saying everybody's going to be saved. There's nobody going to be in hell, and they try to use Bible texts to show that too. And others, of course, they would be leaning towards conditional immortality. That's your immortality is conditional upon belief, but if you don't have that condition met, you go out of existence. So I think it's been watered down to appease people, because the texts of the Old Testament and New Testament were written in a barbaric age. It wasn't uncommon for someone to wish someone not only dead, but to burn forever in hell. And it was a barbaric era where if some virgin got abused, then they would cut that virgin up into pieces and send it to the 12 tribes of Israel and say, let's enact revenge on the tribe of, I think, of the Benjamites. And let's kill them all, and so that kind of barbarism is a fruitful plain for accepting the idea of a hell after life. So the barbarism is coming to light, because of that in the modern era, and I welcome that, because it splits the Christian churches up into different sects within denominations, and they're splintered now in so many ways on so many different issues that it's quite humorous to behold.
What do you think about Cardinal Vincent Nicholas saying that the idea of a burning hell is not part of the Catholic teaching?
Well, one thing about the Catholics is that they have all kinds of denominations inside the one church, so long as they accept the papal authority and I think the Immaculate Conception of Mary and other sorts of things, that the church is the magisterium. They can have all kinds of different theologies. So they really do have a multiple number of theologies within, the bishops, the Pope, and the parishioners. So I'm not surprised to hear any Catholic say almost anything, really. He can say that, but I'm not going to get into the disputes of whether he's right or not. I mean, I'm going to say, well, it certainly is, because the point that I make is that the theologies are so wide and varied because there's no truth to them, and any unevidenced belief system can be stretched to say anything. So that's my point. I'm trying to stay above the theologies and look for the evidence, and I find it non-existent. Now, if they want to say something different, there's a God who's all loving, all powerful, and all knowledgeable. Well, then you've entered my territory, the one in this book that I've edited, that shows, I think, almost to a point of refutation, that God doesn't exist. Now they want to maintain that, see, but it doesn't fly in the face of the arguments in the book and the lack of evidence of their faith.
On the making excuses for God section of the book, you quote Richard Dawkins as saying, Richard Dawkins said it best: evolution is a fact beyond reasonable doubt, beyond serious doubt, beyond sane, informed, intelligent doubt. Beyond doubt, evolution is a fact. It is the plain truth that we are cousins of chimpanzees, somewhat more distant cousins of monkeys, more distant cousins still of aardvarks and manatees, yet more distant cousins of bananas and turnips. Continue the list as long as desired. It didn't have to be true, but it is. We know this because a rising flood of evidence supports it. Evolution is a fact. No reputable scientist disputes it. That being said, what do you make of Christian theologians that dodge this and decide that, yes, evolution is true because God created Adam and Eve via evolution and what they call evolutionary creation?
Yeah, I think Robert Price and Ed Sumanen wrote a pretty good book called Evolving Out of Eden, which I also quote probably in that same chapter, where they talk about the various responses that Christians have come up with to try to stick with the evolution and still maintain their faith, or that there was an Adam and there was an Eve. Well, I think, of course, I think their responses are indicative of the fact that they don't know how to make sense of this and they can't agree. I mean, you would think that if there was a God who revealed himself, to us, why did he reveal himself such that, one, evolution would be shown to be a fact in our generation and future generations from the biblical perspective, and that they don't have, and he didn't provide Christians with any way of settling the dispute as to, what should be made of that fact. So, yeah, it's just basically making things up as you go. My former professor William Lane Craig just wrote a book where he's arguing that there really wasn't Adam and Eve, but it's so far back in time that there's no evidence for it. or he's trying to accept the science of the day and saying, well, this mythical story in Genesis 2 and 3, it was actually writing about an event that actually took place in time. Now the evangelicals are tearing him up on that fact, and I welcome watching the results. But some of them are buying into that. They'll buy into anything rather than give up their faith, rather than give up on God. So I find it interesting, but failed bullshit.
What do you make of certain Christian conspiracy theories, such as, and this is their defense, I mean, of young earth creationism? They'll say that dinosaur bones, it's a massive conspiracy, was planted by demons all over the world to test their faith.
Well, Well, that's been a trick of the trade for a long time. God allows Satan to deceive us so that we wouldn't know the truth. But everybody who believes in demons would have a different theology.
Hmm.
And so everyone could say the same thing about other Christians who have a different theology too. Satan is deceiving you, based on what I know, that women, you're saying women are inferior. Well, that's Satan deceiving you. Or you're saying that evolution isn't a fact. Well, that's Satan deceiving you. I mean, everyone can say Satan's on my side. I don't have that option. I can't say, well, Satan's deceiving you. I'm just saying you're deceived. You are deluded. You're deluded based on your upbringing and your culture, based on your family's heritage and the influences that went into your theology, and nothing more. And that the fact is, you should start examining your faith as if you were an outsider, a non-believer for the very first time in your life, especially as you enter the university. Once you do that, it's time to re-examine your faith, because it was taught to you, indoctrinated into you. And it's not Satan deceiving you when you come across a fact that you can't explain away based on your faith. So it's one another excuse. I mean, I find it odd that anybody would still believe in demons or Satan in today's world. I mean, where's evidence for him? You see around every corner, and why is he worried about little old me and whether or not I have a tummy ache when there's a war going on in Ukraine? Do something about that. Show me you can do something about the big things. You know, you know, um, show me that God can do something about Satan's working in the big things, and then I might have a tendency to believe that, but I see no evidence on the big things, so why should I see evidence of it on the little things?
From what you make of early Christian theology, was hell originally located inside the earth, or was it just always supernatural, completely supernatural?
Well, again, that's asking me what the true theology was, and like
Mm.
Bart Ehrman, I think that Christianity was so split in the early centuries, the earliest century, that we don't know which is the original Christianity. But I do know that some fundamentalist people have said that, according to the scriptures, hell is in the belly, in the bowels of the earth. so,
Hmm.
so there were and are people who believe that. I don't know. I'm not going to pontificate on whether or not that's true. I just so note the item. I just so note that that's how some people can look at the Bible. Now, you think that if there's a God who's a good communicator, who is omniscient and can foresee how people would misrepresent and misunderstand his texts, that he would be clearer. I mean, something very simple like hell. Yes, hell is in the bowels of the earth. It's not said like that at all, and repeatedly said it, and it's never given any other contrary statement or wherever hell's supposed to be, if hell even exists. But we don't have that. I mean, what we have are people, men, usually men, who came up with these words, and based on whatever communities they were involved in, they wrote what they thought was God's words, or they even manipulated things and lied about them. So there's no reason to trust that any one given statement about hell is true in the past, especially as we know from the evidence that this doesn't exist now.
Throughout the book, natural disasters are often discussed, with also the fact that Christians attempt to dodge those to make excuses for God. Sometimes they also say God does these things to test people's faith through suffering. I think they also use the same argument to justify God being an imperfect creator by saying he created us with our flaws on purpose, also to test our faith. What do you make of that?
Well, I forgot what I may have written about in the book. That was actually, even though it just came out, it was a couple of years ago. But it seems as though God is he's testing us way too much if he exists. You have to grant that there's a God who is testing us, because suffering, natural disaster suffering, moral suffering, can incapacitate some people. It can cause them to commit suicide. It can cause them to do and think and uh, feel terrible about themselves, extremely depressed people. So here's a God who doesn't read minds, because if he can read minds, he doesn't have to test us. Okay, well then scratch that off the board, because this whole testing is just a sham. It's like the first test, Adam and Eve supposedly in the Garden of Eden. I mean, he either knew they were going to sin or he didn't. Now, if he did, then he set them up to fail. That's pretty obvious. Now, Calvinists, they'll say, yeah, that's right, but then there's no reason to worship such a God either. I don't understand why. I wrote a chapter in my book on Calvinism. I mean, I don't understand why you'd worship someone who has created all this and used us in doing so. I mean, like manipulated us, like put us in situations where we couldn't do anything otherwise, or known what we would do. So this whole idea of testing is just a sham for an omniscient God. Let's just throw that out. Well, then what do you got left? Well, let's start. We could throw out compassion. He's certainly not a compassionate God, and if he can do anything about it at all, and he doesn't, he's not an omnipotent God. That's the focus of many of the chapters in my book.
I remember that Richard Dawkins said something along the lines of God is the omnipotent surveillance camera. Does it seem that way to you, that in early Christianity they set up God to be something like that? That way he's like, oh, he's looking at all your actions, he's always watching you 24/7. It's kind of like to be almost like the adult Santa Claus. Like he knows when you're bad, and he also knows when you do good, and he'll reward you and punish you accordingly. What do you think? What do you think of that?
Well, I only felt that argument, that abuse from the ultimate dictator in the sky after I left the faith. So I don't expect Christians to feel it now, because in their minds, God sees us. He sees us, whatever we're doing, but we always have excuses for what we're doing as we're doing it, so that we continue to do it. And he will look upon us with love and concern and forgiveness, and sometimes we just had a way to put him out of our mind, but he was looking at us and he's watching. But they don't apply that to world problems of starvation. I mean, is he really looking upon that child who is famished and can't find food and is dying? Is he really looking on that child, and just simply watching, like eating popcorn in a movie theater? What's going to happen next? Well, that doesn't seem to occur to Christians too often, and that's what I want them to see, that this ultimate surveillance God up there, if he's not doing anything about what he's surveilling, then he's an incompetent, uncaring, unknowing God, one or the three. So while I never felt the force of that argument, it has a lot of force to it when you think about what he's seeing in the world. Is he watching that girl being raped right now? Or is he watching in Ukraine, where they're just simply, executing people and burying them, trying to hide the crimes? So that's the kind of surveillance that should make people reject that kind of a God's surveillance.
Well, thank you for joining me. This has been a fascinating discussion. I'd like to, at some point, I'd like to have you back when I can think of a new set of questions, because there's a lot of material in the book to go through. But yeah, I just wanted to make this not too long, but a short video on this, because I think this is important, and I know that some people like short videos. So what I decided to do is I decided to do it in this style for this particular subject, to get straight to the point. And I think we did that today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during a live stream. Thank you.